evening, everybody. It's really nice to see so many people in person and to welcome those of you online. It's really a full house, so thank you for being here. For the Center for Jewish Studies lecture tonight in partnership with the New York Public Library with Eyal Ben-Elyahu, who will be speaking about Jews and global geography. Today's event is co-sponsored with the New York Public Library, and it's part of our Fordham New York Public Library lecture series and Jewish Studies Research Fellowship. And so I want to thank our colleagues at the New York Public Library for partnering with us for many years now with this program. Mila Sholachova, Amanda Siegel, Matt Knudsen, and Melanie Loke, and others. It's been wonderful working with them. And now, finally, I have the honor of introducing our speakers and respondent. Eyal Ben-Elyahu is a professor of ancient Jewish literature at the University of Haifa. He specializes in how place and space have been perceived over the course of history. He's published several books, including Ben Gvulot, Borders of the Land of Israel in the Consciousness of the People in the Second Temple and the Roman Byzantine periods, published in 2014, and Identity and Territory, the Jewish Perception of Space in Late Antiquity, published in 2019 from the University of California Press. And together with Fergus Miller and Yehuda Cohen, he published Jewish Literature from Late Antiquity, 135 to 700 CE, a handbook. And he leads a new innovative project, Alma, a digital and analytic atlas for the Jewry of the ancient world, and has served as a visiting scholar at the Center for Jewish Studies at Oxford University, Harvard University, and the Katz Center at the University of Pennsylvania. And Professor Ben-Eliyahu is spending this month as a research fellow at Fordham University and the New York Public Library, working on a comprehensive essay on Jewish geographical writing throughout history. And it's also a great honor to introduce Professor Richard Talbert, Professor of History at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, who flew in especially for this event. So we're really grateful that you're here. His research focuses on Greek and Roman consciousness of space and time and on mapping. He oversees the Ancient World Mapping Center, and he's the author of many books. And so I'll just read a couple of them here. Challenges of Mapping the Classical World, Roman Portable Sundials, The Empire in Your Hand, Mercury's Wings, Exploring Modes of Communication in the Ancient World, Rome's World, the Berytian Atlas of the Greek and Roman World and Map by Map Directory, the Atlas of Classical History, and other works. So we're thrilled that you're both here to join us today and for the lecture and response, and we're looking forward to a good conversation.
Thank you, Sarit. There are many places where a person could discuss the geographical perception of the world. Speaking here at Lincoln Center in the middle of Manhattan about the Jewish understanding of the world structure feels to me like standing at what the ancient Greeks called the omphalos, the navel, or the center of the Western world. I want to begin by expressing my thanks to the Center of Jewish Studies, Fordham University, and the New York Public Library for the opportunity to develop these projects, which focuses on global geography in the Jewish tradition. Special thanks to Professor Magda Teter and Professor Sarit Katan-Grivets for the warm and generous hospitality and the opportunity to be here with you. In my lecture today, I would like to sketch an outline of the nature of Jewish depiction of the world from a geographical perspective. This will be compared to the depiction that originated in cultures with which the Jews came into contact. The timeline of this lecture will stretch from biblical literature to the modern era, passing through the Second Temple period, the Rabbinic era, medieval times, the 16th century, early modern period, and the 19th and the 20th centuries. The attempt to sketch so large a picture requires the use of broad brushstrokes. My intention is to use a bird's-eye view to outline the relationship between the atmosphere of involvement in political activity in which Jewish writers lived and their preoccupation with the world's geography. We open with biblical literature. The Bible is saturated with depictions of landscape and nature, all of them communicating a sense of splendor. Such, for example, are the descriptions of the nature in the book of Psalms, Job, and the Song of Songs. Local geography is noted in portrayals that focus on spaces within the borders of the land of Canaan, the lots of the tribes, and local references like the routes which run from Bethel to Shem, the book of Judges. But no comprehensive descriptions of global geography are given. The biblical source that does somewhat touch upon global geography relates to what is known as the Table of Nations, found in Genesis 10, and its parallel in the opening of the first chapter of the Book of Chronicles. These texts provide descriptions of the genealogy of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, which are ethnographic in nature and embedded with geographical information within the prophets, the professions to the nations, such as the one found in Ezekiel 27, makes reference to nations and kingdoms, but are both near and far. The nations and the kingdoms are near and far, but not a global geography. Here we turn to Second Temple literature. Most of the texts we have can be dated to the second half of this period, from around 200 BCE and onward. Three of these compositions include exegesis of biblical Table of Nations with substantial geographical dimension. The first two, the Genesis Apocryphon and the Book of Jubilees, date to the 2nd century BCE. Both are closely associated with and rewrite the biblical Table of Nations, adding geographical elements. Josephus, the third source, includes a sort of geographical literal mapping of the biblical Table of Nations in his Jewish Antiquities, composed at the end of the 1st century CE. The common denominator of this exegesis is their dialogue with the Greek global geography. Greek depictions of the world originating in Ionia, in Asia Minor, have been termed in research the Ionian map. According to the Ionian map, the world is divided into 3 continents: Asia, Europe, and Africa, Libya. These descriptions characterize the omphalos, navel of the world, as the pole connecting Earth and the heavens. Like a navel at the center of the body connects a fetus to his mother. The author of the Book of Jubilees adds an additional parameter to the biblical story, with Noah casting lots to assign territory to his sons. Shem receives Asia, Japheth, Europe, and Ham, Africa, Libya. The book depicts a world divided into 3 terrestrial bodies, separated by 3 bodies of water. As Philip Alexander has shown, Jubilees' author was the first to locate Jerusalem as the omphalos, standing at the world's center, both horizontally and vertical. Alexander explained this as a polemic, an alternative to the Greek perception of Delphi as the world's omphalos. A similar picture, with a few changes, emerges from Genesis Apocryphon and the way Josephus describes the attribution of Noah's sons after the flood. Thus, all 3 of the Second Temple series, sources that contains geographical texts correspond to the contemporary Greek literature on the world's structure and divide the world into 3 continents. While all 3 Second Temple sources converse with the Ionian map, they diverge fundamentally from the important Babylonian source, the engraving on the clay tablet from Babylonia, dating to the middle of the 1st millennium BCE. This map focuses on Babylonia and its surroundings. The world is depicted as one round land surrounded by sea and no separation into continents. Some have suggested that similarities can be seen between this map and the Book of Enoch. This comparison relates primarily to the depiction of the land as a round mass, and the use of a pattern relates to the number 7 for geographical bodies. The Book of Watchers and the Book of Luminaries, both sections within Enoch, describe 7 rivers, 7 mountains, and 7 islands. The scholars that view the two as connected noted that the Babylonian map contained 7 nagu, identified triangles around the landmass surrounded by water. But other scholars, like James Vanderkamp, have pointed out that there are 8 nagu on the Babylonian map. Here, we should preserve 8 nagu, this triangle. Recently, Shbal Ratzon has proposed a different world map that she believes emerges from the Book of Watchers, one that is even further for the Babylonian world map. Now we turn to the rabbinic literature. A study of Tannaitic literature, which originated in the land of Israel and the later Amoraic literature from the land of Israel and Babylonia, demonstrates a focus on local geography of the land of Israel and Babylonia, primarily for the purpose of Jewish law or halacha. In the Tannaitic sources and the land of Israel's Amoraic sources, the geographical definition of the land of Israel relates to agricultural commandments such as sabbatical years and tithes that should be observed in the land, only in the land of Israel. In the Babylonian Talmud, local geography is part of the discussion of genealogical matters in the Babylonia. Ultimately, throughout the corpus of rabbinic literature, global geography is almost absent, though reference is made to the ocean surrounding the world in the Babylonian Talmud. There is no mention of the 3 continents that were the basis of the Greco-Roman global geography. Compared to Second Temple writing, rabbinic interpretations of the biblical table of nations are partial at best. In the rabbinic interpretations, the geographical dimension and the geographical division of the world are absent. Indeed, rabbinic literature is moralist and legal in its nature. It has no interest in the sciences. Nonetheless, it contains or reflects extensive knowledge in the various scientific fields. Geographically, we can assume that the rabbis were exposed to the world geography contained in the Greek and Roman worlds of knowledge. Therefore, a comparative look at Roman geographical writing, such as that of Strabo or Claudius Ptolemaios and his 2nd century composition geography, can serve to underscore the absence of this type of knowledge from rabbinic literature. The same picture emerges from comparisons to Christian writings from the 1st millennium CE. Natalia Lozovsky has demonstrated that the church fathers were occupied with global geography for the study of the Bible and within the exploration of the way that God rules the world, the whole world. The shift between the dialogue conducted by Second Temple period Jewish writers with Greek and Roman culture in relation to the structure of the world and the absent, or at least storage, of references to the structure of the world in the literature of the sages may be attributable to various factors. As I claimed in the opening, and as I intend to show, it seems that while Jews were involved in international affairs, their interest in global geography was widespread. Jewish writers from the 2nd century BCE, living during the events that led to the Hasmonean revolt, while the Hasmonean state was being established, and under the rule of the Hasmonine state, such as the authors of the Book of Jubilees and Genesis Apocryphon, were interested in global geography. The same is true to Josephus, who wrote in the courtyard of Roman imperator. In contrary to that, the sages in the land of Israel and Babylonia were not engaged in political activity. Jews in that period were occupied only with internal management of local community. Thus, discussions about global geography had a homiletical character, for example, in the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Chagiga or Psikta de Rav Kahana. Let's see, Bavli Chagiga, Talmud Bavli Chagiga. But the sages say the world rests on 12 pillars. And some say 7 pillars. Rabbi Elazar ben Shammua says it rests on 1 pillar. Rabbi Yehuda said there are 2 firmaments. Resh Lakish said there are 7, namely Vilon, Rakia, Shechina, Zvul, Ma'on, Makom, Aravot. And in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, the Holy One, blessed be, created 7 firmaments. The Holy One, blessed be, created 7 lands. The Holy One, blessed be, created 7 deserts. The Holy One, blessed be, created 7 seas. The Holy One, blessed be, created 7 eons. And in the printed editions, we have reference to time. The Holy One, blessed be, created 7 years. The Holy One, blessed be, created 7 days. The relative similarity between the nature of the descriptions in the book of Enoch and the descriptions in the rabbinic literature should be noted. For example, the use of the recurring motif 7 to the mountains, to the skies, and to the seas is apparent. And I suppose that some of you are singing to themselves this song, Leah Goldberg, about my beloved country. She wrote it in Lithuania, but she wrote about 7 days, and later about 7 days, but the title of the song is My Beloved Homeland. So the motif of 7 is returning with Leah Goldberg and also in other songs of her. Anyway, we'll go back to antiquity. Outside the Jewish world, the maps that we do have from the first millennium CE, like this of Cosmas from the 6th century CE, are schematic in nature. One exception is the Pointiger map, a detailed world map of the Roman Empire, which we may consider the world map. This project has been recently understood by Richard Talbert as a propagandist tool intended to mark the unification of the empire by Diocletian more than just world map. Turning to the Jewish medieval writing, we begin with Avraham Bar-Chia, who wrote in Barcelona in the late 11th century and early 12th century, and held a position within the court of the King of Barcelona. Bar-Chia constituted an important link in the transmission of Muslim scientific knowledge to Christian Europe. In his astronomical book, Form of the Earth, Tzurat Haaretz, published in 1133, he embedded important references to the world's geographic structure. More than 2 centuries later, in 1375, the Catalan Atlas was composed by Abraham Crescas and his son Judah, at the request of Pedro IV, King of Aragon. Catherine Cookman-Appel has recently asserted this project had a dual goal. First, the map was made for the king, who had ordered it, and presented it to the King of France, serving his own political and religious goals. Secondly, a hidden layer of hints, a hidden light of hints was designated for the Jews of the time. It was meant to, and I quote her, negotiate his patron's expectation and his own cultural identity and frame them within the political, cultural, and religious discourse of his time. The common denominator of these two is the relationship to the royal court. This is the place to note that the famous Muslim world map created by Al-Sharif al-Idrisi in 1145 was made when Idrisi served in the court of the king of Norman Sicily, Roger II. The picture that emerges is one of a linkage between proximity to international diplomacy activity, to international diplomatic activity, typically royal courts, and writing about global geography. Another common genre in Greco-Roman literature, as well as in the first millennium Christian literature, is itinerary literature. Early Jewish sources, ranging from the Bible to the 12th century, do not contain itinerary literature. The description of Rabbi Barbachana's travels in the Babylonian Talmud is fantastic in nature, and therefore should not be included in this genre. In fact, it teaches about the absence of a real itinerary. I have asserted that the writer in Tractate Brachot that counts the sites where miracles was done to Israel, Makom Shena'asa Bo Nesh LiYisrael, should also not be considered itinerary literature. I explained it as kind of irony. The description of the first Jewish journey undertaken by Benjamin of Tudela from 1165, as recently argued by Martin Jacobs, actually recounts a journey between the Jewish communities from Spain to Central Asia and not a global geography. In every place and settlement Benjamin of Tudela reached, he described the Jewish community and its leaders, even when he was interested in buildings or objects. As in Rome, he identified them with the Jewish past. In my opinion, Jacob's claim is also true for the accounts of the Ashkenazi Ptachi of Regensburg, who set out on his 20-year journey after Benjamin of Tudela. Most of the other travel descriptions from the Middle Ages focus primarily on the land of Israel and its surroundings. The distinct geographic dimension in Astoria Parisburg, Kaftor Ferach, is also local. It does not engage in global geography. As a general rule, halachic writing in the Middle Ages, such as Maimonides' Mishneh Torah, related to geography only when it informed matters of halakha, such as determining the borders of the land for the purpose of religious directive and halachic definitions of space. A dramatic turn took place in global Jewish writing during the 15th and 16th century. The central cause for the flourishing was the age of discovery. The Portuguese voyages to the Atlantic Ocean, the circumnavigation of Africa, the arrival in India by sea, the discovery of the American continent, and the voyage of Ferdinand Magellan. Jewish writers during the age of discoveries related to these discoveries and the New World. Their writings included Igeret Orchot Olam, Epistle of the Path of the World by Avraham Farisol, and two books by Joseph Cohen, Metziv Gvulot Amim, who set the boundaries of nations, and Sefer HaIndia Hadasha, Book of the New India. Somewhat later, the book Tzemach David by David Gans from Prague and Gedalia Ibn Chayun's historical treatise Shoshelet HaKabbalah appeared. Other Jewish encyclopedias of historical, scientific, theological, or mystical knowledge discussed geographical or ethnographic topics, including Azariah de Rossi's essay Maor Enaim, the book Shiltei HaGiburim, Shields of the Heroes by Avraham Port-Leona, and the writings of Avraham Yagel. The relevant discussions in these compositions align well with the study and writing strands of the late Renaissance. They integrate and even they use ideas from the European culture that surrounded them and the late Renaissance. This period also saw an increase in the development of cosmographical and cartographical literature, which led to the creation of many maps and atlases that described the expanding world. The discoveries gave rise to the new reality in which the world expanded and vast spaces were added to it. The consequence on a religious level was the identification of the newly found sites with biblical names, usually due to similarity to earlier names. The religious transformation that accompanied the Protestant Reformation in the first half of the 16th century, the shock of the Spanish expulsion, and the geographical change with the discovery of the New World were translated into Messianic feelings. David Ruderman and others, and more recently Moti Ben-Melech, who wrote about Shlomo Molcho and David Reuveni, have linked the revival of the tradition of the 10 tribes to the identification of their places of residence with the events of the 16th century. Micha Perry sees the story about the 10 tribes relates by Eldad Adoni 5 centuries earlier as escapism from the reality in which the Jews lived, clinging to the hope of a different reality, in which the Jews would control their destiny. David Reuveni was seen as savior, which came from a kingdom of the 10 tribes. Thus, the engagement with the new spaces that were discovered was bound with the Messianic feelings that accompanied the Jews who lived in the age of discovery, and was one factor that fed Jewish global geography writing about the New World, such as Farisol's Igeret Orchot Olam. These processes during the 16th century, together with experiences of Gracia Mendes Nasi, reveal an imprint of Jewish political activity along the 16th century within the international arena. The appeal made by Gracia Mendes Nasi and Don Yosef Nasi to Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent to renew the Jewish settlement in Tiberias is just one example. There was also an island that was ruled by Don Yosef Nasi in other episodes. Jewish political activity was present among the Jews in Europe in the 16th century. The combination between the crisis after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, the discoveries of the new spaces, and the hope for a political Jewish entity in the form of the kingdom of the 10 tribes encouraged and promoted the practice and discussions of global geography. Following the cartographic movement in Europe during the Age of Discovery in the 17th and 18th centuries, the Jews began to draw maps. Rehav Buni Rubin recently published portrays the lanes, Hebrew maps of the land of Israel from Rashi to the early 20th century, containing maps of the Holy Land, some of them copies of European maps, as we will see. But while the phenomenon of printing world maps spread, including the printing of the first world atlas in 1570, Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, but by Abraham Ortelius, Jewish maps constructed on the Holy Land rather than the globe, and they're focused on interpreting the Bible or used to artist decoration. Here we can see how Abraham Bar Yaakov in Amsterdam copied the map of Christian van Adel. But we have these examples only for maps of the land of Israel, not map of the globe. The Jews didn't copy any map of the globe, the world. Significant shift took place during the Enlightenment. Jews in Russia became interested in the nature and the geography of Russia, and was shown recently by Yaakov Shavit and Judah Reinhardt, who presented and discussed the 19th century Jewish essay that dealt with Russia. That with Russia from a geographical and natural perspective. Throughout the 19th century, Jewish compositions were written on global geography. The first book in Hebrew dedicated to geography was Shimshon's Bloch, 2 volumes, Shvilei Olam, Paths of the World, and later Kalman Schulman published 10 volumes of Mosdei Aretz, Foundations of the World, featuring all countries and all the history of their inhabitants. The first Jewish atlas was published in London in Hebrew in 1825 by 2 Zionist activists, Ze'ev Jabotinsky and Shmuel Perlman. The atlas presented global geography from the point of view of Jabotinsky, the 1925. The atlas presented global geography from the point of view of Jabotinsky, a prominent revisionist Zionist leader. Here too, global geography and diplomacy were intertwined. Mental perception of space integrates a variety of factors: personal and collective memory, culture, and experience. Therefore, I'm not sure that one should look for a single principle that would explain the place of universal geography in Jewish culture throughout the ages. However, a comprehensive review and comparative examination of the world geographical writing over time reveals that Jews' interest and involvement in global geography relates to the degree of their exposure to geographical topics and the cultural world with which the Jews came into contact. The Jews' interaction with Greek knowledge during the Hellenistic period led to their adoption of the Ionic map with certain changes. The same is true to the 16th century, when the Jews in Italy were exposed to European writing, like Avraham Frisol, for example, bases his geographical thesis on Italian writers like Montova Lavodo, as well as the 19th century with the European Enlightenment. But exposure is not an exclusive influencing factor or a sole explanation. I would like to suggest that the relationship between Jewish political involvement or activity is an important factor that influenced the measure of interest in the world geographical map. This is my conclusion concerning the shift from the Second Temple period, the authors of the Book of Jubilees and Genesis Apocryphon and Josephus, to the lack of geographical references in rabbinic literature. The absence of Jewish political activity during the first millennium CE and the first half of the second millennium CE was related to the paucity of engagement in global geography. Later, Avraham Bar-Chia and Avraham Kaskaz wrote and created maps while they worked close to the royal court. The Messianic aspiration in the 16th century were tied to political changes and related to the 10 tribes and the places where they were located, reflecting the Jewish hopes for a sovereign entity after the expulsion. In this way, they were catalyzed of the interest in global geography. The relationship between the two dimensions of time and space, the chronotop, leads to the suggestion that emerges from the synchronic and diachronic review of the place of the world geography in Jewish writing. The ebb and flow of historical writing is in fact identical to the writing about geography. The writing about historiography is in fact equal to the writing of the geography of the world. That is, as suggested by Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi in his book Zechor. While the Jews were an active political factor in the world, they had an interest in writing history. On the other hand, during the periods when they were not an active political party, they had no interest in writing history. A comparative analysis of Jewish historical writing, the Jewish global geography writing, demonstrates that the waves of interest in history are parallel to the waves of interest in global geography. I would like to use Yerushalmi's thesis and project it on the discussion about Jewish global geography writing. While Robert Dunfield Amos Finkelstein and others have expressed reservations about his theory, it seems that his ideas can be applied to Jewish geographical writing. Further discussion might be to apply the distinction between history, memory, and collective memory to the varied geographical perceptions or even the varied geographical mental maps of the world. Cultural processes, such as the degree of engagement in global geography, do not usually depend on one exclusive factor. They are part of complex whole, which is not necessarily a pattern which repeats itself. In this talk, I noted the affinity between a reality in which Jewish political activity exists and the interest of the Jewish writers in geographical description of the world in order to illuminate the changing Jewish interest in the world map. Thank you.
Any questions?
I come here. You want me to stay, don't you, too? You don't like people wandering around, I know. And that, yeah.
Let's sit in the corner.
Okay. No, no, not you. No, no, no. Oh, he's going to go. Right. No, you should come out. No, come on. Be visible.
Okay.
And I have to be very brief because I am simply amazed that you pull a capacity crowd. Are there any seats left? I think probably not. Yeah. The room is full. So this is very impressive indeed. And you've given us a most stimulating lecture, and thank you so much. I'm very grateful for the invitation to attend, and I'm frankly honored to be offered the opportunity to comment on what Eyal has said. Let me begin by expressing admiration for the ambition and span of your topic. As has already been said, you're well known for taking on large projects, and I think you have another one here, and I congratulate you. After all, the range of global geographical writing in the Jewish tradition, all the way from biblical literature to modern times, is immense. And I have to confess that, by contrast, the scope of my own expertise, such as it is, remains very limited by comparison. I really don't stretch far beyond Greek and Roman antiquity. In my foolishness, I thought that was quite a lot, but after what you've covered, it seems very, very little. Even so, I feel confident enough as a historian to find your broad claims persuasive. In seeking to explain the lack of Jewish global geographical writing and of itinerary literature during antiquity and far into the medieval period, you rightly point to the absence of large-scale Jewish, what you call political activity. If you will permit, I think I would want a slight change of wording here. I think I'd want to set political aside and put in the adjectives empire building or empire boosting instead. It comes to the same thing, perhaps, but I think we should bear in mind the notion of aggression and empire building, because after all, in any age, it's imperialists typically who are bold enough or deluded enough to think globally. And now, it's also true that among Greeks and Romans, a few experts thought the same way, but they did so for purely scientific reasons. Little attention was paid to their findings, and they hardly bothered to publicize them. These were academics away in an attic somewhere who weren't very concerned with contemporary affairs. Rome's rulers were exceptional in grasping how maps made by these academic scientists could be adapted to become formidable tools of imperial propaganda. Big, colorful display pieces to thrill viewers if you're Roman or pro-Roman, or to frighten them if you're Rome's enemies or captives. And I'm thinking of pieces like Agrippa's map, made at the end of the BCE era in the reign of Augustus. We don't have that anymore, but it was clearly a great big display piece in Rome for everybody to see. And also the map that you mentioned, but you didn't show a picture of it. I'm very disappointed. The Poitinger map. Why was there no picture included of the Poitinger map? But never mind. That, I think, was a global map, or I think it was part of a global map that decorated the throne rooms of Roman emperors in late antiquity. And I also think that Rome was deliberately placed at the center of the Poitinger map, because that's, of course, what all powers who make big maps do. Surprise, Babylonians put Babylon at the center. Jews, as you said, put Jerusalem at the center. You talked about New York being the center too, and so on. People who do baseball put, you may remember the famous cover of the New Yorker, they put Cooperstown as the center of the world. It all depends on perspective. But the Jewish writers are completely typical in centering their own world. Another claim that I think you make persuasively is that Jewish horizons and Jewish thinking were expanded and energized by transformative developments ongoing in the world around them. And you cite notably the Age of Discovery in the 15th and 16th centuries, and later the European Enlightenment. As you showed, these acted as tremendous stimulus for global Jewish writing and map making. Within my, if I can put my in inverted commas, little classical world, likewise, let's remember that it was comparable such developments that opened up previously unimagined vistas to Greeks and Romans. Let's not forget that. For Greeks, first, what came to be called the colonization movement between the 8th and the 5th centuries BCE, whereas, you know, they expand all over the Mediterranean. They set up so-called colonies along the shores of the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Then later, Alexander's campaigns into the Persian Empire and into what Greeks called India. And for Romans, first their confrontations with the Carthaginians that brought Romans beyond Italy, then with powers of the Eastern Mediterranean, and eventually by the 1st century CE with peoples of Central and Western Europe, and even after crossing ocean to Britain, beyond the known world. That, remember, for Romans is utterly mind-blowing. That we are going to and occupying and controlling land beyond the world that anybody had ever imagined. I think today, I don't know, I suppose the equivalent today would be when the US establishes its first colony or settlement on the moon. Okay, we know about the moon, but the notion of actually living there would be pretty special. I think this would be pretty unusual. It would grab attention, and it would expand perspectives. Well, finally, may I enter what I think could be one small caution, and then ask you two questions to get, I'm sure others have plenty, but this might get some discussion going. Just as a caution, may I suggest that Cosmas Indicopleustes map be set aside as just a quirky curiosity. He really is outside the mainstream in the mid-6th century CE with his provocative conviction, which I admit he gained from reading the Bible, that the world is flat and rectangular. That was pretty wacky for its time, and I don't think anybody really took that on board. Okay, it was a viewpoint, but I'm not quite sure we should linger over that. Two questions, and these are both, I'm throwing these out to you as speculative questions. I don't know whether you have any thoughts about it. Do you think that Jewish writers in antiquity might have reflected more on global geography if the Jews had been a people more engaged with the sea? I'm not imagining for a moment, I'm not saying for a moment the Jews were not seafarers. Of course they were. But if we think of the Greeks, I mean, their engagement with the sea is so deep that, I mean, it seems only natural that one of the earliest themes of their storytelling and their poetry is the Odyssey, with its voyages and its maritime adventures, all of which made a powerful, lasting impact. And if you sail all over the place on the open sea, you surely, that does stimulate you to have a worldview. Whereas if you're more land-based, I'm not sure. Well, it's a thought. What about the Jews and the sea in this context? I ask you. Second question. Are you tempted to go beyond Jewish writing? Sorry, I rephrase that, Jewish writing, and to speculate at all on the global mental maps that Jews must have formed in their heads as they came to travel and settle across the known world? And as you rightly say, worldview is shaped by personal and collective memory, as well as culture and experience and much else. And I'm thinking, from what little I do know, of the amazing communicative networks that Jewish merchants and Jewish communities developed, I'm sure you know, linking Western Europe, Iraq, India, and China in the Geonic or Abbasid period, and the mental maps that must have sprung from that kind of travel, and for its time, travel and contact over mind-blowing distances. I don't know whether you have any thoughts on that, or are there clues? Are there clues we could tease out to pursue worldviews further? Well, enough.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for a lot that you said. We have a lot to discuss, but concerning two questions about the Jews in the sea. Thank you for this question. In the rabbinic literature, there is an expression, Medinat Hayam, the city of the sea, the city-state. The sea-state. What is city-state? City-state is a generic place. It's kind of place that is ambiguous place that you don't know where is it, and when do they use it? In stories about women that their husband went to the system, place which is far away, they don't know where is it, and they don't know if he will be back. So I totally agree with you. They were separated from the sea. Sea was not the part of the mental map. This might be a cause for them. Now we're coming to your second suggestion or question about the mental map of the world. I suppose that they had the knowledge. They had the knowledge, but they didn't know. And now I'm coming back to your beginning, your opening of the opening of your response. They knew a lot, but they wrote not only grow maps, they almost didn't grow maps, but they wrote about a much smaller distance. I tried to explain why. In the draft that I sent you, I omitted it. I quoted the Mishnah in Tractate Rosh Hashanah. But now we are in Rosh Chodesh. Today is Rosh Chodesh. We're between 2 days of the beginning of the month. And the Mishnah described the way that they announced about the new month. And the Mishnah in chapter B, the second chapter of Tractate Rosh Hashanah, said that they make fires.
Yes.
They make fires from Jerusalem to Mount of Olives, and to Mount of Olives to Bet Biltin, and with Bet Biltin to Babylon. And for Babylon, all the diaspora saw the fire. Where's the diaspora? The diaspora is Babylon, Babylonia. In their mental map, the diaspora is only in the east, not in the west. And they knew, and also after that, they knew that there are Jews in Europe, but they didn't mention it. They didn't mention Europe, and more curious than that, they didn't mention the Jews in Europe. Why? There is a suggestion of Doron Mendeles and Aryeh Drey that you can read about it. They might be right. But I think that they became more internal to the land of Israel and Babylonia. They knew about you, but they didn't deal with it. It was out of their scope, even that they knew that there is continent there and there are Jews there. I think so.
Yeah.
But thanks a lot.
Thank you.
You have a question that was asked from one of the people watching virtually, and so we'll start with that. Here's the question. You showed that Jewish cartographical practices were entangled with the culture in which Jews lived. And wondering that, especially for the Middle Ages, if Jerusalem is often depicted as the center of the world, as it is often in Christian TO maps, or if the local or imperial context of the cartographers more determined what was central, or were the maps meant to be more mimetic? The accuracy, for example, of the Catalan atlas is often highlighted.
Okay, if I understood, the question is Jerusalem was depicted as the center of the world. The answer that we don't have Jewish maps, as a matter of fact. We have Avraham Bachria, who described, which dealt mostly with astronomical image of the world. So do David Gans. We have the map of Crescas, but the map of Crescas produced for the king of Aragon. So there are no Jewish maps from the medieval era. As I said, also in the 16th century, when they copied European maps, they didn't copy maps of the world. But because the rabbinic literature adopted the idea that Jerusalem is center of the world, the Omphalos of the world, or the Jewish medieval writers repeated the idea that Jerusalem is the center of the world. So it became part of the Jewish tradition. So try to do it. Ask someone, from where do you know that Jerusalem is the center of the world? He will answer you from the Bible. And if you ask them where in the Bible describes that Jerusalem is the center of the world, they will start to search for it. They do not imagine that it's not biblical. It's post-biblical. But after it became a Jewish tradition, it was a strong Jewish tradition, like a Christian tradition. Thank you.
Just a quick note of levity, because I was charmed by the concept that people often think that wherever they are is the center of the universe. And he mentioned a New Yorker cover. There's a famous New Yorker cover. Now I'm curious that I can't in my mental map figure out exactly where the viewer is looking from. My guess is either Rockefeller Center or the Empire State Building. They're looking across, and by the way, scientifically, this is incorrect. It's not a river scientifically, but they're looking across the Hudson. You can see a tiny, tiny little strip of land. And you can sort of see the words New Jersey as the geographical place. And the punchline of the famous cover was, everything else is New Jersey.
Thank you.
Manhattan was the center of the universe.
Thank you.
Thank you for this fascinating talk, and I found it very compelling. Also, I think, at least for rabbinic literature, the lack of global geography is really overwhelming. Thank you for pointing that out to us. I was also thinking, like Professor Talbert, that maybe it's not only interest, but control that is at the center of this issue. I had in mind a chapter by Ben-Eliyahu about geography and politics, where she lays out how mapping and description of space is part of what is expected from an empire, but also manifests its control to the people in that space. And in that context, I think it's interesting to think about halachic, the land of Israel as a halachic entity, as also being a form of control, of assuming control of this land, although they didn't have political control, military control, but some form of control. And that is why the sages in classical rabbinic literature are spending a lot of energy to map this.
Thank you, Hanan. Thank you. I must admit to the book of Ben-Eliyahu was my inspiration to compare or to contrast rabbinic literature and Strabo and Augustus.
Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And thank you for this remark about controlling. I certainly agree with you. You suggest that they form the borders of the land. They form what is the land of Israel, right? And more than that, they used the term land of Israel and didn't use the formal name Palestine. You know better than me that in the rabbinic literature, the expression for this, or the definition, is land of Israel and not Palestine, although that they lived in Palestine. Thank you.
Talk a bit about the 10 lost tribes, and I think isn't it fascinating that even though the Jews themselves were not, you know, the imperial power, that once the European Christians began imperialism, they found the Jews everywhere, right? Because the lost tribes were all of the peoples that they conquered. And so isn't that kind of an irony of this? And even in the idea that, you know, the Christian Mapamundi is really based on that Jewish, you know, Genesis 10 map, right? I mean, it's in a sense that Jerusalem at the center sort of is the Jewish map that gets projected with all these Christian maps, but there's no actual Jewish map. So I just thought that was really wonderfully ironic.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really ironic.
Yeah, I wanted to, I'm interested in following up on your mention of the East as a place, being kind of the place of diaspora and exile. And would you say that looking to the East, kind of mentally mapping the East and that into like an attitude of anxiety kind of generally, and also like going off of that, different cardinal directions to take with that versus attitude of emotion. I'm thinking also of like the particular frame the West kind of has like a historical society.
Thank you. In the ancient world, also in the Bible, the human being is with his face to the east. This is, as you know, the reason that left is north and right is south and the back is west. But so I agree with you, but we must bear in mind that the rabbis knew about rabbis in Babylonia, in the northeast. So for them, the diaspora was in Babylonia. Now I'm a bit quoting the suggestion of Edrei and Mendels, which suggested that the Jews in the West didn't speak Hebrew, and might be that they didn't read the rabbinic literature. So when they spoke about the diaspora, they concentrated on the Jews in Babylonia. So it's more northeast than east.
The relationship between space and time.
Thank you.
The idea of that both spatial and temporal, and it strikes me that when you said that it's the same sort of impulse to write history as it is to sort of map the world. I was thinking also that it's not really only writing history, it's writing global history, right? And it's being concerned with understanding the origins of the world and also the eschaton. And so it's interesting, right? Like in Jubilee, that Enoch, where they have such interest in like the cosmological origins and then the end times. That's also when they sort of map the world spatially. And then in things like the rabbinic sources, where they're like actively ideologically opposed to the study of the beginning and the end, is also where they sort of constrict spatially. So I don't know where that leads, but I was curious to know sort of more about that.
Thank you. I think that you're right. But and if I should give a title to what you said, I would say Min ha'olam ve'ad ha'olam, from the world to the world. So so you think that global thinking concerning time and space together, and we can see it in the midrashim that I brought. That they speak about space and time. And it's not joke. Also, Leah Goldberg, when she wrote about her land, she used the number 7 for space and time. And space and time are going together. And you open it with the word olam, which the meaning of olam is space and time. And you know, Shama Friedman wrote a whole book. And when he tried to identify when is time or when is space, it comes together. And you added to it. Thank you, Sarit.
Yeah, I don't know if I can articulate a question, but what the conversation is making me think about is kind of movement through space and time, namely travel. And the response talked about, you know, seafaring, which also has to do with travel, and then encountering borders and mapping borders and so on. But I'm just, in my mind, I'm a New Testament scholar. In my mind, I have images, that scholars try to map the journeys of Paul, let's say, according to the book of Acts, which is daunting, but that's my image. And we have the same with the Gospel of John, for example, the trips back and forth from Galilee to Jerusalem through Samaria with the encounter with the Samaritan woman and all of that. And I don't know, does that have a relationship to the kind of mapping that you're looking at? Because it brings together time and space in a concrete way that we all experience ourselves.
Yeah, thank you. I wrote in my book a brilliant idea. Later I will tell you why I'm saying that it's a brilliant idea, because later I found it in Danny Schwartz's book.
So that was really brilliant, yeah.
That at the moment that Paul entering the plot, the map became world map or Western map.
Yeah, right.
So when Paul opening the borders of the nation, you're also opening the borders of the land.
Yeah.
So when Paul blurs the borders of the Jewishness, he blurs also he blurs also the borders of the land, and there is no land. There's no nation and there's no land. So it comes together.
But on the flip side, his travels, notionally anyway, kind of map the known world as he would have seen it.
Yeah, and he goes west.
Yeah.
He goes west. The rabbis speak about east, and
He goes west.
he goes west to the Greek speakers.
North and south, yeah.
Thank you.
So it's being distinct that they thought of the West as Christian, and that's why they, like related. I'm saying, since you say they only, the Levites only reflected about Israel and the East,
Yeah.
maybe because for them the West was Christian.
Christianity is a bit later to the Tanaic literature. It was Gentiles for them. It was Gentiles, but I almost agree. They concentrated with Jews that spoke their language and their ideas, as well as Benjamin of Tudela. His itinerary, he traveled all the world, but he described only the Jews. There is a wonderful song of Natan Alterman about, I don't know if you know him, the Gashash sing about Benjamin Tudela, but it's a wonderful song, but it's totally wrong, because it's a mistake, because Natan Alterman describes how Benjamin Tudela saw such weird things and strange people and strange animals. No, Benjamin Tudela only saw Jews. And even when he visited Rome, he saw King David, Ishai, and other. He brings biblical stories to these wonderful sites. So they saw mainly Jews.
But pardon my saying it, but that is, and your both comments, but that is the way many people travel.
I agree.
They see what they want to see. And if I may interject a parallel case, you say Benjamin, yes, of course, he goes all over the place. And when he gets somewhere, what he talks about is what he finds concerning Jews. Think of Egeria, this very high class lady who evidently comes from somewhere in the Western Roman Empire. We guess in Spain or the side of France, and she writes in Latin, and she goes all over. She goes all the way to Sinai and so on, and she goes to Egypt as well. What is she? She only talks about Christian things. I'm sorry, I don't say that as an insult. I mean, that's what she talks about.
Yeah.
Well, and she goes all through the Roman Empire. You think of all the history that there is in Asia Minor, the Middle East, and so on. She never mentions any of that at all, because she's focused on relating the Bible to Christian experience and so forth.
Thank you, Richard. Also, a previous pilgrimage, the Bordeaux pilgrimage,
Yeah.
who visited Jerusalem, and he didn't have plenty of Christian traditions because he was the beginning of the, but he didn't see the remains of the Herodian temple. He didn't see.
No.
He didn't see it. He ignored it. He ignored it because Jesus didn't like this temple. And Paul didn't like this temple. So the Bordeaux pilgrimage didn't see the remains of the.
Or didn't talk about it. Didn't talk about it.
Yeah, he didn't want to see. Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Let's go.
Going to add, do you think that the fact that John mentioned the West has to do with that? The fact that it's not mentioned in the Bible? That this is the physical region of the world? The land of Israel and Babylon.
I didn't think about it. Thank you. It's a good idea. I quote again and again, the suggestion of Aryeh Drey and Don Mendels. What I just added to their theory is they spoke about the fact that the rabbis didn't mention the Jews in the West, the Jews in Europe. I added to that they just didn't mention Europe at all. Not the Jews and not the continent and not the area. They spoke only about Rome, about traveling to Rome, and only until the Bar Kokhba revolt they are traveling. After the Bar Kokhba revolt, they are traveling only until Asia Minor. But what you said, Rivka, it's a wonderful idea. We have to check it. Maybe they are limited to the scope of the Bible, the biblical scope, as interpreters of the Bibles and not as geographical. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I learned a lot, so much. Thanks a lot.